I'm Paul Kennedy, and this is Ideas.
A poet is someone who can pour light into a cup, then raise it to nourish your beautiful, parched, holy mouth.
The verse of 14th century Sufi mystic Hafiz, the supreme master of the supreme art form of Persia, poetry. Even today in Iran, you can stop someone in the street and, likely as not, they can quote Hafiz. But remarkably, more and more people in North America can now quote him. The voice of Hafiz is rising in a chorus of new translations, rivaling the hottest-selling poet in America today, Rumi, another ancient Sufi mystic. What's going on here? When mystical Persian poetry sells hundreds of thousands of books in a culture like ours, something extraordinary is afoot. Who's reading this ecstatic verse full of longing for the beloved? And why does Hafiz have such resonance today?
Good poetry makes the universe admit a secret. I am really just a tambourine. Grab hold. Play me against your warm thigh.
That's Edmonton writer, broadcaster, and filmmaker Bob Chelmick. Tonight on Ideas, Bob goes on a quest for Hafiz, exploring how 600-year-old mystical Persian poetry can have such a powerful resonance today. The program is called Hafiz and Bob.
In the dead of an Alberta winter, each poplar log seems to have its own tone as I knock the snow off at the woodpile. The bink or bunk rings through the forest. I'm at my cabin near Nakaman Lake. It's an hour into the country from Edmonton. I come here whenever I can. It's small, it's primitive, no power, no running water, no phone. But I have the company of books, the Upanishads, some Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. Okay, some Harry Potter, too. And this new guy, Hafiz. This Hafiz book is a gift from a friend in the States. It's apparently how many of these get around these days. Readers so enthusiastic they buy copies for friends. And I've taken to reading Hafiz aloud out here by the fire under a January sky. Our union is like this. You feel cold, so I reach for a blanket to cover our shivering feet. You ache with loneliness one night, so much you weep, and I say, here's a rope, tie it around me. Hafiz will be your companion for life. Inside the dust jacket of Daniel Adinsky's book, The Gift, Poems of Hafiz, the Great Sufi Master, I read that Hafiz was born Shams-ud-Din Muhammad. Hafiz means memorizer. He earned that title once he learned the entire Quran by heart. Hafiz lived all his life in Shiraz, in 14th century Persia. That would make him a contemporary of Chaucer, Dante, the Plague, and the 100 Years' War in Europe. He was the most beloved poet in Persia, still is apparently, in Iran and throughout the Persian-speaking world. He is the undisputed master of the ghazal, a short lyric poem, 7 to 20 lines, about love, both human and divine. And that's what's really struck me. I've never run across this mix of the sensual and the spiritual. My dear, let prayer become your beautiful lover, and become free of this whole world, like Hafiz. Anyway, after a few days with this Hafiz fella, I'm determined to learn how and why this voice from an ancient past and another place can ring so many bells for a prairie boy holed up here in the bush.
This is Daniel Adinsky calling for Bob Chelmick. I'm here in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Let's see, I'll give you a little Hafiz poem. I'm here. A beautiful line of Hafiz. He says, I have come into this world to see this, the sword drop from men's hands that beautiful? All right, Bob.
My name is Leonard Lewison, and I'm a research associate in esoteric traditions in Islam at the Institute of Ismaili Studies in London, where I also teach Persian. And first of all, you have to realize that poetry is the monumental art of Persia. There are more great mystical poets, and I say this with no reservation, in Persian literature than there are in any other literature of the world.
My name is Ahmad Karimi Hakkak, and I'm professor of Persian language and literature and Iranian culture and civilization at the University of Washington. Hafiz is heir to 500 years of this kind of poetry. And during that time, layer after layer of meaning has been wrought into the texture of Persian poetry, so that by the time he comes on the scene, every word has several meanings, every important word. And so he, being very deft, in fact, the deftest Persian poet in harnessing the various meanings, he makes poetry that is eternally interpretable without committing himself to any ideology.
The role of the Sufi is central to Islam, even though the mystics tended to be mavericks, seeking God on their own terms outside the framework of orthodoxy.
In the mouth of the beloved, speech is a jewel. However, the verse of Hafez is better than that.
By the time Sufism comes around, it needs this language to keep saying one thing and then veil it with another expression, and then veil it still with another expression, and use the very verses of the Quran to justify what seems to an orthodox clerical leader as deviations from the Quran.
The word Sufi literally means one who wears wool or one who is pure. And in the Islamic tradition, there were a group of people going back to the time of Prophet Muhammad who were the poor people in his immediate precincts or courtyard, which were called the Ahl al-Safa, the people of the bench. And these people were the mystics who surrounded the Prophet Muhammad.
Sufi wisdom and practices have been focused on opening the devout believer to higher states of consciousness and ultimately ecstatic union with the divine.
Esotericism and mysticism became a popular institutionalized form of piety. So all of the great masters of literature were a good 50% mystics, at least. The Sufi tradition is still alive and kicking all through the Middle East. It's hard for you or for anyone as a Westerner to grasp this, that mysticism is not marginal to the Islamic tradition. It's the quintessence, it's the center.
The fundamental tenet of Islam, there is no other God but God, forbids the personification of the divine. The mystical Sufis, though, see God in people and things. Over the centuries of shifting religious politics, many Sufis were persecuted. For 30 years in his hometown of Shiraz, Hafez himself had to sneak off at night to study in secret with his spiritual master. And so, the ecstatic poetry of Sufism developed an elaborate code of language to mean one thing for the Sufis and another for the censors.
O student of the cup of Hafez, drink, and then go like the wind to the master, and tell him the story of this great wine.
Images of wine and the tavern would represent love and the Sufi school. A cup could mean a person to be filled with love, and intoxication would be of the spiritual kind. The dervish or seeker might be called a drunkard, courtesan, scoundrel, beggar. The nightingale became the lover, the rose, the beloved. And was the beloved or object of desire depicted in his poem really a woman, or did Hafez mean God in person? Poet, author, and translator Robert Bly.
Send out the criers. Go to the marketplace of souls. Here, here, all of you in the colony of lovers, here it is. For several days now, the wild daughter is reported lost. Call all your friends. Whoever's near her is in danger. Her dress is ruby-colored. Her hair is done in sea foam. She takes away reason. Be alert.
Daring and sensual stories make for good marketing, and for the reasons Hafez was forever being scrutinized by the clerics, he has always been embraced by the masses, in his time and on to today.
She's a night woman, shameless, disreputable, and red. If you find her, please bring her to Hafez's house.
A busy street today in Tehran. The chaos of traffic, well-dressed people leading busy lives, few heeding the call to prayer. In many ways, Iran is not unlike a bustling society in the Western world. Sport, movies, music, politics, they're all national pastimes. But so too is Hafez. He is embraced here not merely as a cultural relic, as we do Shakespeare, but as a vital part of everyday life. In this modern society, if you can imagine it, poetry is important. Leonard Lewison.
You cannot find any taxi driver in Iran that doesn't have 2 or 3 poems of Hafez memorized. So this is common culture. It's still a bardic civilization, you see. So poetry is still their major focus of interest.
Professor Ahmed Karimi Hakak.
I remember very vividly, it was my father used to have this circle of friends, and they would sit down for hours. They would read from the divan, and I remember, the words appeared so awe-inspiring to me that I committed them to memory. And here I was, 10, 11, 12 years old possibly, and my father and his friends were sitting around and discussing one poem, and they came to a line where everybody threw in the towel, and they said, everybody said, I just don't understand this line. And here I am, this kid, and I turned around and said, Daddy, I don't understand it either. And he gave me one of those looks, and I knew exactly what it meant. And it was until a few days later when he told me that there are different varying degrees of not understanding Hafez. But I wanted to put myself on par with them. That's an aspiration that every boy and girl in Iran develops, to come to a level of understanding or not understanding Hafez.
A daunting prospect for translators. Even in the original Persian, it's not so much a matter of understanding Hafez, it's more about to what degree we do not understand. The sunny veranda of a cabin in the snowy Alberta woods. Well, feels a long way from anything resembling a bardic civilization, especially an Islamic one. But something extraordinary is taking place here, and the 600-year-old mystical poetry of Hafez is at the center of it. For a few days now, I've been turning at random to pages in Daniel Ladinsky's book, The Gift, Poems by Hafez, the great Sufi master. And I'll be damned if it doesn't seem like Hafez is speaking directly to me, addressing questions that have been on my mind even a few moments before, questions of the heart mostly. The first dozen times I marveled at the coincidence. Since then, well, I just find myself smiling a lot at the apparent intuition in action. Then the kicker. I read in the book's preface how people have for centuries considered Hafez, quote, a living oracle able to impart the most intimate, timely advice. It is said Queen Victoria used to consult Hafez in this manner, unquote. Poetry reveals that there is no empty space. When your fears surrender to your strengths, you will begin to experience that all existence is a teeming sea of infinite life. True art reveals there is no void or darkness. There is no loneliness to the clear-eyed mystic in this luminous, brimming, playful world. The Atlantic Ocean breaking onto Myrtle Beach in South Carolina. At low tide on a sunny morning like this, the expanse of sand is a perfect place for Dan Ladinsky to take his dog for a run along the sea, a chocolate lab named Hafez. Daniel Ladinsky has more than an intuitive relationship with Hafez. His is downright mystical. A nocturnal visitation has given Dan the feeling Hafez has personally sanctioned his renderings. His 3 volumes of Hafez have become perhaps the most successful English versions of all time. Ladinsky has been virtually obsessed with rendering his versions of Hafez since a Sufi poetry reading at an ashram in India 9 years ago.
I have to say, it's the first time in my whole life that I ever thought I was hearing poetry, that I ever had an appreciation for poetry. And I was at the time 39 years old, 40 years old.
A college dropout from a wealthy St. Louis family, Dan Ladinsky spent 6 years in Pune with the followers of the late Meher Baba, a silent guru who was called an avatar, God incarnate. Meher Baba's family was from Iran, and his favorite poet was Hafez. Dan Ladinsky feels his involvement with the translations was orchestrated by the guru's right-hand man, Erich Esawallah. Ladinsky calls Esawallah a saint, his spiritual mentor, and the man who, while walking out one morning in Pune, first told him that Hafez had never been properly translated.
As soon as he said that to me, I just instantly said within a few seconds, I can do that. And he says, how could you do that? You don't know a single word of Persian. I said, well, I'll learn enough to do it. And then he says, you could be risking your life. You'd be fooling around, tampering with one of the great Islamic treasures, literary treasures, one of the greatest literary Islamic treasures in the world. And you're even Jewish. You could be risking your life. I said, my life isn't worth a damn, Erich. I said, I don't care. I know I can do this. And then he said, you'd have to be able to sometimes see as a saint sees. I said, well, Erich, I don't know anything about that. I just know I can do this.
By the next morning, Dan Ladinsky had his first Hafez rendition done, and with the blessings of his spiritual mentor, Erich Esawallah, a remarkable obsession began.
Oh, listen more carefully to what is around you right now. In my world, all that remains is the wondrous call to dance in prayer, rising up like 1,000 suns out of the mouth of a single bird. It was the very first one that I officially did.
Daniel Ladinsky does not call his Hafez poems translations. He prefers versions or renderings. The original Divan of Hafez, the full collection of poems, has just under 500 ghazals. Ladinsky says he already has 5,000 renderings, but he believes they are, through mystical revelation, the real voice of Hafez.
I was at my girlfriend's house, and I'm not sure if I'm dreaming or if I'm seeing this, but it's like that the ceiling wasn't there, like the walls weren't there, and this remarkable light starting becoming very close to me. And when the thing got real close to me, undoubtedly I thought, I'm looking at God. And then the thing started to speak in English, and as soon as it did, started to speak the first couple words, I felt as certain as I could feel that this was Hafez speaking to me in English. And he said, I want you to give a message to my artist and my seekers. And then he just kept reciting his poetry, but it wasn't coming to me as words now. It would get out of his mouth and it would just turn the light. And it would just penetrated me, hundreds of lines. And I woke up then, I came out of that and woke up. I remember going downstairs and typed it out, and I just have it stacked away with my several thousand poems somewhere. And I feel that he has sanctioned this work, or created some kind of force behind it.
Last night, so many tears took flight because of joy that the sky got crowded and complained. When I discovered God hiding again in my heart, and I could not cease to celebrate. Oh, dance, Hafiz, dance, write 1,000 luminous secrets upon the wall of existence, so that even a blind man will know where we are and join us in this love.
I guess I was 20. I had dropped out of college after sophomore year and headed east to Kathmandu from London, 1972.
Elizabeth T. Gray, Jr. is author of The Green Sea of Heaven, 50 Ghazals from the Divan of Hafez. This New Yorker's personal Hafez revelation was far more prosaic than that of Dan Ladinsky, but a revelation just the same.
Like a good hippie, I was headed east to attain enlightenment of some fashion. And as I was hitchhiking through eastern Turkey, I heard about these poets in Iran who wrote what was supposedly love poetry, but it wasn't clear whether the beloved was actually a person or God.
The sea of love is a sea that has no shore. There, you can only give up your soul.
And I had been writing poetry for as long as I could remember. And when I got to Tehran, I went through all the bookstores, and I rapidly learned that Hafez was considered the master of them all. And I bought translations of his. And to my postmodernist ear, the translations I thought were just dreadful. They were all late Victorian, Edwardian, that had been done by British lieutenants or eccentric English women who'd been traveling through Iran. And I dismissed it.
Each time you give your heart to love is a joyous moment. For auspicious deeds, there is no need for divination.
I passed through Shiraz, and I went to the tomb of Hafez, and I recall this garden of the Hafeziyeh, and it was quiet and beautiful. There was water running through it. It was a rose garden surrounded by walls separating it from the desert, and tall cypress trees. I remember the pilgrims from all over the Eastern Islamic world, and the circles of students sitting with teachers. And I looked around and I thought, all these people can't be here for the stuff I read in Tehran. So, like many 20-year-olds, I made a vow. And the vow was to go back to school and read this beautiful stuff in the original and essentially create the translations I would have liked to have had in my hand as I stood there.
Then Elizabeth Gray, Jr. got practical. She graduated in law and went into business. That is until one day when a call came from a publisher well aware of the success of the Rumi books. Liz Gray's passion for Hafez quickly eclipsed her glass-towered career. She called her high-powered corporate clients and walked away for 8 months to prepare for the publication of The Green Sea of Heaven.
And it was clear to me that it mattered more than my day job, because what is more important than the confluence of art and spirit and transcendence and the meaning and nature of life? What is more important than that? There's nothing more important than that, at least to me.
You are unaffected by the cry of Hafez. I am perplexed at that heart, hard as granite.
On Ideas tonight, Hafiz and Bob. It's Edmonton writer and broadcaster Bob Chelmick's quest for Hafez, a 14th century Persian mystic whose poetry has become a bestseller in 21st century North America.
All the garden's flowers in the evening light look like jewels, except the rose, which was sculpted in the image of God.
Thomas Rain Crow has published 11 books of poetry, including 2 volumes now of renderings of Hafez, In Winesellers Street and Drunk on the Wine of the Beloved. Crow first made a name for himself as an urban beat poet in San Francisco in the 60s. His heroes were Rimbaud and Baudelaire, and he lived the life he thought a poet should, debauched and deranged, as he now calls it. But all that has changed since he found the Sufis.
The Persian Sufi poets presented a whole different universe of possibility in terms of vision for what poetry could be and what it could do. It was a poetry of hope. I mean, the poetry of derangement in the Western world basically is a very shadowy, very dark vision. Most of the poetry embraces the shadow side of human life and consciousness, whereas it seemed like that the Sufis, this sort of a spiritual quest that was all-encompassing, universal, and full of light. It was a revelation to me, really. Oh, beloved, now that you are here, under the sun and moon, work has taken a new meaning. The radios of the 7 heavens are playing this story over the airwaves, while those with small ears listen to stations only playing silly songs. Hafez, where did you learn the magic of writing words? The beloved seems to have turned your weary wail into gold.
Thomas Rain Crow didn't find Hafez until the mid-1990s, and like other modern poets who work from old translations, Crow's passion for Hafez began with grumbling over the bad poetry he found there. Bad, but good enough to inspire his own renderings.
There was enough material there that I could work from that I just started doing my own renderings from his renderings, just as an exercise to see if I couldn't unearth archaeologically a voice for Hafiz that would satisfy this expectation that I had. And before I knew it, I'd become sort of enraptured in this process. I found that I was having fun, but I was trying to remain true to what I thought Hafiz should be saying, or what his voice should feel like.
Trying to remain true to Hafez. Is the salve of this new Sufi verse the real thing? Or is much of it so distilled and distorted as to hardly resemble the original? It is no small debate that seems to pit the intuitives against the intellectuals.
To those who gossip, I'm a heathen and worthless as dust. But in the beloved's eyes, they are worthless too.
The zeering of cicadas that are hidden high in the enormous oak trees in this stately neighborhood of Minneapolis. The sun dapples onto a 100-year-old white house at peace with its surroundings. You'd never know that inside a literary wrestling match is about to begin. This is the home of Robert Bly, prolific author, philosopher, translator, and perhaps the most influential living poet in America. Bly instigated this entire Sufi poetry revival when he handed Professor Coleman Barks a book of Rumi translations from the 19th century. He asked his friend to free these poems from their cages. This morning in his living room, as a friend plays sitar, Robert Bly is trying to free Hafez.
People say that a mansion in heaven will reward good deeds. But we are rogues. And so a room in the tavern for us is enough.
This is one of 4 ghazals by Hafez that Robert Bly published in his recent anthology of sacred poems, The Soul is Here for Its Own Joy.
Lie down along a stream and watch life flow past. This allusion to the passing world for us is enough.
For 10 years, Bly has been wrestling Hafez into English, painstakingly, with the help of Persian scholar Leonard Lewison, who's visiting today from England. They have only managed to finish 12 so far.
It's inappropriate, Hafiz, for you to complain of your gifts from fate. Your nature is like water, and your beautifully flowing poems for us are enough. I love that.
Yeah, that works well. I mean, I have no objections.
Great.
It really is good.
Your nature is like water. Your beautifully flowing poems for us are enough.
I mean, I've been following it in Persian, and you know, there's nothing wrong. It's all.
The soft tones of Leonard Lewison hide a strong passion for Hafez and a strong sense of what's right and not right when it comes to translation. He's been at it for 30 years.
When I was around 16 or 17, I read a book called Rumi, Poet and Mystic by Nicholson, R.A. Nicholson, who translated this selections from Rumi. And I saw that this poetry, Rumi, was the most incredible poetry I've ever read, particularly because it's poetization of metaphysical doctrines. And so I decided when I was 16 or 17 that I wanted to go to Iran, definitely, and learn the language.
The young New Yorker did more than that. He earned a degree in Persian language and literature in Shiraz, the 14th century home of Hafez. Now he's a leading scholar in the field and has embraced the Sufi tradition and its quest for the sublime.
Hafez is, first of all, probably the most difficult poet in Persian literature. He's certainly the most popular. And Hafez is the supreme poet of the double entendre, of ambivalency and ambiguity.
Right, yeah.
No one has ever lifted the hair from the face of thought.
Well, it's just because, you know, in the Middle East, women are veiled. So
in a Hafez single stanza, you could make 20 different mistakes. And so, you know, one can't do it without someone who knows the Persian perfectly.
It's implied here. From the moment that the ringlets of speech or the tresses of speech with the pen, with the comb of a pen has been combed.
Hopeless, hopeless, hopeless. That is incredible. The way
How can a translator serve the two masters, the literal and the figurative, the accuracy of detail and the power of the art form? With Hafez, it's a tall order indeed, even with the offerings left by the flowery translators over 100 years ago.
That's what Gertrude Bell did, remember, when we were looking over her translation.
Gertrude Bell's translations were first published in 1897. They were part of the original wave of Western interest in Hafez that began in the 18th century and continued through to the likes of Goethe and Emerson, championing his genius, not to mention Queen Victoria. The first English translators tended to be classically educated career military officers stationed in the East in service of empire. And though their work became a window on the literary treasures of Persia and elsewhere, it's often difficult to see clearly through that window to the source.
The greatest obstacle in all of the translation of Hafiz and Rumi have been the English academics. And they're just devoted to, of course, Wilberforce Clark is the first one who did a complete Hafiz. And he was a sort of an English general, and it was very touching that he got absorbed in Iranian poetry. But what did you think if you had John Donne translated by General Patton? I mean, please, please, please. So what Coleman and I and a few others have done have been, in a way, rescuing the poems from the excessive Victorian language in which the English generals put them in the beginning.
Coleman Barks, at the urging of Robert Bly, has freed Rumi from the tight corset of Victorian language into what he calls free verse American. The essential Rumi, and now the soul of Rumi, have made the Sufi mystic the most popular poet in America today.
There's a curious attempt going on now to turn Hafez into Rumi and keep only the optimistic parts of Hafez and leave the difficult parts out of the poems. And that isn't quite fair. It's not fair to Hafez. But it'd be a typical American thing to do, to hope that you can get a second Rumi out of Hafez, but he's something different.
Rumi and Hafez are cut from the same Sufi cloth, but they're very different on many levels. Robert Bly says Rumi is like the sun, but Hafez is more the moon, complete with the dark side of depression. And in the original Persian, Hafez is said to be far more layered, structured, and complex. Professor Ahmed Karimi Hakak.
To capture Rumi, you just have to be a human being, whereas to capture Hafiz, you have to be anchored in the Islamic tradition, in the Persian aesthetic tradition, which is why Rumi is translatable, eminently more translatable than Hafiz is. Hafiz is the ultimate challenge, has presented the ultimate challenge to all the translators in the past 300 years or so.
Elizabeth Gray, Jr.
It's very complicated verse. It's like multi-dimensional chess. You know, you can dance to Rumi. I don't think you can dance to Hafez. Maybe you can.
Whether or not one can dance to the original verse of Hafez in Persian, the most popular Hafez in English now beckons readers simply to whirl.
Dance, dervish, dance. Bring the face of God before you. Only love can lift the heart up so high that its true color is restored by the sun. See him near and clapping, that perfect one who fathers divine rhythm. Oh, dance, dervish, dance, and know you bring your master's happiness whenever you smile.
The band leader for this new danceable Hafez is Daniel Ladinsky. His Hafez has little darkness in it and lots of light.
Last night, so many tears took flight because of joy that the sky got crowded and complained. When I discovered God hiding again in my heart, and I could not cease to celebrate. Oh, dance, Hafiz, dance. Write 1,000 luminous secrets upon the wall of existence, so that even a blind man will know where we are and join us in this love.
Ladinsky does not call his free-spirited Hafez translations at all. They're more like meditations on Hafez, just as are his more recent Rumi renderings.
So sometimes I'll find something in these 100-year-old English translations, or I'll find something in one of the footnotes by Clark, and I think, boy, if I turn that loose, who knows what's going to happen, you know? And an example of that, a real example of that, I'll see a line that says, his eyes will forever give. His eyes will forever give. All right, so I think, you know, that's nice, but is that really going to, what's that going to do for the reader? And so I put it inside, and it bounces against something else, and all of a sudden, from that, could very easily come that Rumi poem that I recited to you last night. That's a prime example of somehow how they'll work. His eyes will forever give. So there again, there's this seed, and like sometimes what came out of that seed has nothing to do with the seed. But to me, an example of that could be is then I like when the music happens like this. Something in his eye grabs hold of a tambourine in me. Then I turn and lift the violin in someone else, and they turn, and this turning continues. It has reached you now. Isn't that something?
Dan Ladinsky's renderings are reaching far more readers than any other Hafez interpreter today, by a long shot.
And you could say, well, there's no comparison. How could that all come out of his eyes will forever give? Well, I think sometimes that's just the way it works. I don't know. It's like I said, I put it inside, it bounces against something else, and all of a sudden that's there, and I think, well, God, this is a great poem. Coleman Barks would kill to have that poem, had that as a Rumi poem.
Dan Ladinsky isn't selling quite as many books as Coleman Barks yet, but his 3 Hafez volumes, I Heard God Laughing, The Subject Tonight is Love, and The Gift, have sold in the hundreds of thousands. On one of the days I spent with him in South Carolina, he received 2 calls that say a lot about the power of his Hafez. One was from the music director at Harvard, wishing to use his renderings for a new composition for choir and orchestra. The other was from a Japanese T-shirt company, wanting people to wear his Hafez on their chest. In Ireland that week, by the way, Dan said that his 6-year-old book, I Heard God Laughing, had just reached number 7 on the bestseller list, and that's not just poetry books. And here in the snowy woods of Alberta, it's Dan Ladinsky's The Gift that has me whirling inside as I read by the fire that's sending sparks dancing towards the aurora tonight. All your images of winter I see against the sky. I understand the wounds that have not healed in you. They exist because God and love have yet to become real enough to allow you to forgive the dream. You still listen to an old alley song that brings your body pain. Now, chain your ears to his pacing drum and flute. Fix your eyes upon the magnificent arch of his brow that supports and allows this universe to expand. Your hands, feet, and heart are wise and want to know the warmth of a perfect one's circle. A true saint is an earth in eternal spring. My love for your master is such, you can just lean back and I will feed you this truth. Your wounds of love can only heal when you can forgive this dream.
I know Hafez probably at least 50% of his poems by heart, and I could not, leafing through that book, find one thing in the English that would correspond to anything in the Persian I knew.
Leonard Lewison saw Dan Ladinsky's work for the first time when I handed him The Gift.
We say in English literature, he wrote a poem after Horace or after Homer. So most of these translations are actually not translations. They're poems written after. You might call them, in the Persian tradition, they're istiqbal. They're poems welcoming Hafez, sort of inspired by. But I don't know how much, since they don't know the original and they don't really seem to have penetrated much beyond the literal meaning of the metaphors, I don't know how much they convey.
And the academics are putting up a stink, really. I mean, that there's a real difference between true translations, literal translations, and this other thing that people are trying to do.
Poet-translator Thomas Rain Crow.
I really believe that we've evolved beyond that, kind of pickiness and not only in human consciousness, but in the world of literature. I would like to think so anyway. The main point is that we get something that inspires us and elevates our thinking, and whatever it takes to do that is, I think, fair game.
There's a remarkable statement that Hafez makes, which is, no one could ever paint a too wonderful picture of my heart or God. And whenever I think that maybe I'm taking too much liberties with this, it comes down to the simple thing. Am I making him appear more beautiful? Am I making him more giving?
I am a hole in the flute that the Christ's breath moves through. Listen to this music.
Hafez says, my poems lift the corners of the mouth, the soul's mouth, the heart's mouth, and affect any opening that can make love.
I am the concert from the mouth of every creature, singing with the myriad chords.
There are many listening to Daniel Ladinsky's versions of Hafez, and yet there are those who think his poetic license is only a learner's permit, that he shouldn't be driving Hafez without a Persian instructor beside him. Ladinsky, though pained, is undeterred.
The world could go against me, and I'll still just be out there plowing the best this little mule can to try and get these beautiful poems into more and more hands.
O Saki, bring that wine, the one that brings trance, that builds spiritual power. That brings perfection.
The Hafez translations of Elizabeth T. Gray, Jr. have been embraced by academics and Iranians alike as being close to the original in form and spirit. Robert Bly calls them some of the most beautiful in the English language. In this remarkable comparison between Bly and Gray, we see how finding a balance between the literal and the poetic is always a personal choice. Even among scholars, the meaning shifts as Hafez moves from Persian into English. For starters, there's no gender distinction in the Persian language. Liz Gray published this ghazal in The Green Sea of Heaven. Robert Bly forged his own translation with Leonard Lewison. Here's a running comparison.
Curls disheveled, sweating, laughing, and drunk. Shirt torn, singing ghazals, flask in hand.
Her tangled hair, her drunk open lips, her sweaty shoulders, her blouse torn open, her raucous singing, her wine cup.
His eyes seeking a quarrel, his lips saying, alas. Last night at midnight he came and sat by my pillow.
Her eyes were looking for trouble. Her mouth was ready for jibes. Last night at midnight she sat down in my bed.
He bent his head to my ear and said, sadly, "Oh, my ancient lover, are you sleeping?"
She put her lips close to my ear and whispered these words, "Oh, my old lover, are you asleep?"
The seeker to whom they give such a cup at dawn is an infidel to love, if he will not worship wine.
The friend of wisdom who receives such a night-stealing wine is a traitor to divine love, if he doesn't worship that same wine.
O ascetic, go, and don't quibble with those who drink the dregs. For on the eve of creation, this was all they gave us.
O ascetics, go away. Stop arguing with those who drink the bitter stuff, because it was precisely this gift the Divine One gave us in pre-eternity.
What he poured in our cup we drank, whether the mead of heaven or the wine of drunkenness.
We drink whatever is poured into our glass. Whether the heavenly wine or raw wine, it doesn't matter.
The wine cup's smile and his knotted curl have broken many vows of repentance, like that of Hafez.
The laughing of the wine's face and the disheveled curls of the beloved. How many vows like Hafez's have been broken in moments like this?
Moments like this, the 21st century. From a distance of 600 years through a daunting language barrier, the voice of a Persian Sufi mystic resonates for an Alberta prairie boy alone here in the woods by a crackling night fire. So maybe this Ladinsky Hafez I'm reading aloud to the coyotes isn't much Hafez at all in a literal sense, but boy, it sure has a certain luminosity to it. So why, at a moment like this, are these Islamic mystics the top-selling poets? Doesn't Islamophobia rule the day? Well, it must be pretty luminous poetry if it helps us see past the stereotype of the terrorist wrapped in the flag of Islam. But why this strong resonance?
There is a longing to transcend the secular, materialistic, positivistic basis of our culture and to seek something much deeper, the metaphysical truths underlying our daily, workaday lives.
And it just so happened that the Sufi master poets have sort of arrived at a time when people are searching for something a little deeper and a little bit more spiritual, and have embraced these poets.
The great religions are the ships, poets the lifeboats. Every sane person I know has jumped overboard. That's good for business, isn't it, Hafez?
I think It's partly the spirituality of Rumi and the kind of roguish, if you will, nonchalance of Hafiz that appeals to us beyond ideologies. I definitely think it's a blessed move if it helps us to move beyond our own tribal and national allegiances and reach out to the humanity regardless of the background or history.
There's a strong urge for spiritual life once more because of the built-in apprehensions of the divine that's in the human being just when you look at the stars at night. But that's the experience that our ancestors had for thousands of years. They'd wake up in the middle of the night lying on the ground and look at the stars. So that's very, very old. Then you put them in houses and they forget everything, and they just start watching television or something. But somehow our brains have been prepared for hundreds of thousands of years for what we call spiritual ideas or spiritual energy or something like that.
When I play my lute, the invisible ones call a conference, and the angels travel far, knowing a rare entertainment will soon take place. When I play my drum, my notes become so real, the winged ones throw saddles upon them. An outrageous holy rodeo begins. No one has ever sat with Hafiz and not left for the better. No one can read my poems out loud in a tender, loving voice and not narrow the difference, not narrow the gap between you and God. When Hafiz plays his lute, my notes ascend into the air and form infinite blue crystals that will move on the wind's breath for hundreds of years as my sacred debris, as the divine dust rising as a gift from my singing bones.
Hafiz and Bob, written and presented by Edmonton writer and broadcaster Bob Chelmick. Thanks to Coleman Barks, Robert Bly, Thomas Rain Crow, Elizabeth Gray Jr., Daniel Ladinsky, Leonard Lewison, and Ahmed Karimi Hakak. Special thanks to Cynthia Rama and Manaze Manani. Hafiz and Bob was produced in Edmonton by Dave Riddell. You can get a printed transcript of this program for $8, taxes and shipping included. To order using a credit card, call area code 416-205-7367. Or you can send a check or credit card information to Ideas Transcripts, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, M5W1E6. You can also find out more about Hafiz on our website. For a list of poetry books and CDs, go to cbc.ca/ideas and look for the link to featured programs. Find Hafiz and enjoy. The executive producer of Ideas is Bernie Lucht, and I'm Paul Kennedy. Please stay tuned now to CBC Radio 1 for the hourly news, followed by the Arts Today and Between the Covers.